Welcome to the Brainfluence podcast with Roger Dooley, author, speaker, and educator on neuromarketing and the psychology of persuasion. Every week, we talk with thought leaders that will help you improve your influence with factual evidence and concrete research. Introducing your host, Roger Dooley.
Welcome to the Brainfluence podcast. I'm Roger Dooley. This is the second podcast I'm recording today on the 5th anniversary of John Brainfluence. One thing I really enjoy is getting feedback from readers who are applying one or more of the 100 simple strategies I describe in the book. If you've read Brainfluence and have found a particular technique that worked for you, feel free to ping me on Twitter and let me know, or visit rogerdooley.com and let me know via that channel. If by some chance you haven't read the book, or if you didn't know that the name of this podcast came from my book title, I encourage you to check it out at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, or the bookstore of your choice. We're well into the third year of the Brainfluence podcast now, and one of the most enjoyable things about it is connecting with smart people. In particular, it's fun to finally get to speak firsthand with people whose work you've written about, but know only via their name on scientific papers or books. Our guest this week, Adam Gazzaley, falls into that category. It's hard not to follow the practical aspects of neuroscience research without encountering his work. Dr. Gazzaley is the founding director of the Neuroscience Imaging Center at the University of California, San Francisco, an associate professor in neurology, physiology, and psychiatry, and director of the eponymous Gazzaley Lab. I really wanted to use the word eponymous in a podcast, a cognitive neuroscience lab that studies neural mechanisms of perception, attention, and memory. And not just that, but he's co-founded a therapeutic video game company and a venture capital firm focused on a scientific approach to improving human performance. He's authored more than 100 scientific papers. Now he's co-authored a book for the rest of us about a really important topic. The book is The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. Among other things, you'll learn why you open the refrigerator door, stare inside, and can't remember for the life of you what you were looking for in the first place. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Before we get to your book, which is really great, and I'm sure our listeners would enjoy hearing about your business ventures, which are really kind of unconventional and fascinating. I've always felt that video games could be an amazing tool if harnessed for some productive purpose. I mean, a game like Call of Duty requires a lot of learning, even for a very average player, but players don't think of it as learning. It's fun. It's a flow state. Now, I'm guessing that AK-47s and RPGs really don't figure much in your Achilles games, but can you explain what they might be like and what you hope to accomplish?
Yeah, sure. So Achilles Interactive is a company that essentially spun out of technology from my lab, Gazzaley Lab at UCSF, which is now expanded into a center called Neuroscape. And the idea behind it, which drove the birth of Achilles, and as well as most of the research and technical development that we do here at Neuroscape, is the idea that you can create an experience, a targeted experience, to engage someone's brain in a very selective way through network activation, and then through closed loop system, and I'll describe that in a little bit more detail, you can put pressure on that network and that operation and that system in someone's brain to improve it over time. And the closed loop system that really forms the basis of all of our development is to challenge someone in a very targeted way, as I mentioned, and record the data of what their experience has generated, like, for example, how fast they are, how accurate they are, and then use that data essentially in real time to update the challenge that they're experiencing, as well as the feedback on how they're doing. And this closed loop video game design formed the basis of the first video game that we built here at UCSF called NeuroRacer, which went on to become a Nature paper, the cover of Nature in 2013. And then the technology that led to the launching and the founding of Achilles, where they've taken the methodology, which is in the form of a patent behind NeuroRacer, and have now developed a way better game from a game point of view, but even better closed loop dynamics, more usability, better art, music, and story, all of which we think are critical features. And that game is now called EVO, Project EVO, is now in multiple clinical trials to see if it can reach the regulatory levels and approval that's necessary to have it as a prescribable therapeutic device, with the first target at the FDA level being the treatment of ADHD. So that's a little bit about how our research at Neuroscape relates with a company that really grew out of our technology, Achilles.
Mm-hmm. Have you thought about doing it as a consumer-facing thing? I mean, there are all these brain training companies out there now that may or may not be based on really solid science. Rather than going the FDA route, do you think there's a sort of an inexpensive consumer-facing solution that for various things, maybe not even just ADHD, but other types of ways that people could improve their thought processes, without necessarily it being a prescription thing?
Sure. I think that every type of population that might benefit from this type of experiential treatment should. So I think, there's the pathway of educational tools, either in class or out of class for young people. I think for adults that are healthy as wellness tools to either maintain or improve abilities that might need optimization. And then there is the goals of helping people that are suffering debilitating deficits, where you could think of it as a medicine. I expect that in the future we'll have well-validated solutions using video games across all of these different verticals. But Achilles, every company has its own focus, as all startups need to. The real necessity to get physicians on board with other types of treatments aside from pharmaceuticals, which have dominated the world of neurology and psychiatry, we think is really critical. And to have a future where a physician would reach into their, pocket and pull out a prescription pad and write, iPad for 1 month and have that reimbursed by payers and have, a parallel, whether it's complementary or independent of our current, incumbent situation. Where we rely on drugs is an incredible opportunity. So Achilles at least decided to be focused on that route, but I don't think it's the only route possible.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, let's move on to your book. I think its title, Distracted, will resonate with our listeners. All of us have to deal with constant visual and audible notifications. Just heard one on your end there. They're constantly telling our brain, boy, this might be important, pay attention, or might be fun. And we have app designers that are really good at creating addictive feedback loops. And so your basic thesis is that our brains aren't designed to cope with this, correct?
Well, essentially it comes down to understanding the strengths and weaknesses of our brain and then figuring out and understanding where technology has inserted itself. So as I describe in the book, we have, this amazing ability as humans to create high-level goals that are delayed in time, that are interwoven with multiple people and multiple other goals. And, in many ways, I think our goal-setting abilities are the pinnacle of human brain evolution. But we then realize, and lots of neuroscience research has contributed to this, including from our own lab, that we have fundamental limitations on the abilities that we need in order to enact our goals, what we call cognitive control, attention and working memory and the ability to multitask, and that these limitations collide and basically present barriers to our goals. And so I would say that we have this very sort of basic conflict between what we want to do, how we set our goals, and what we're actually capable of doing, how we enact them. And that's where I would say technology has inserted itself. It's not that this conflict hasn't always existed, but I would say technology has exacerbated it by just an unprecedented exposure to information. And not just exposure to information and accessibility to information, but the fact that our devices can ping us when they want to share, not just the other way around. And that has really, really challenged us and created this concept that I described as the distracted mind, which then propagates a negative influence across pretty much every domain of our lives. It impacts education. It impacts us in the workplace. It impacts sleep and health, safety on the road, as well as relationships of how we engage with other people. So that's sort of one of the main theses of the book, that technology has aggravated this conflict between our goal-setting abilities and our very limited goal enactment abilities.
Right. And you call that goal interference. Right. And there's two kinds, internal and external. Can you explain that dichotomy?
Sure. So we can have distractions and the act of multitasking, both of which degrade performance, well described. either in our external world, which we're very familiar with, right? Sitting in a restaurant, trying to deal with all the chatter, or, having a text vibrate in your pocket when you're driving along the road. We get that. But we also have this entire phenomena playing out within our own minds, internal interference, internal distractions, just urges and feelings and thoughts that, without our intentions, rise into our minds and create distractions with what we're trying to do. And then we also make the decision to internally multitask, think about something else while engaging in another goal. And so understanding the full landscape of interference is really critical when it comes to managing it. So, for example, studies have shown that both young people studying as well as office workers in the workplace will interrupt, activities, be interrupted by a task every, 3 to 5 minutes at the most before engaging in something else, and maybe not returning to it even for quite a while. And it seems that those interruptions occur just as frequently from internal sources as, being externally pinged by a device.
Right. So that fruitless trip to the refrigerator, that would probably be an internal interruption of some kind where, you knew you had to go there to get the mustard or something. But in the meantime, you were thinking about the email that you had to send, and you get to the door and you stare inside and you're scratching your head. Yeah, I knew I needed something. And you're looking around the kitchen. What was I working on? Although sometimes I found that I stare into the refrigerator because I think that if I stare long enough, something actually really good to eat will materialize. It rarely is effective, though. But so that would be an internal interference where just your mind is going in various directions, and you lose track of one task because you're thinking about another one.
I'd say it's most likely to be internal. It doesn't have to. You describe what I would describe as internal interruption, which is you're multitasking. You're like, I'm going to go do this, but I'm thinking about something else purposefully. But sometimes it's just an internal distraction, like something just pops into your mind, even though you didn't have the intentions of it. Or it could be external. You could have felt a text come in on your way over there, or there could be something laying on the table that just happened to catch your eye on the way there. So, these are very interwoven, how interference across both our external and internal world degrade our performance and create goal interference. So it's complex. I'd say once you start noticing all, and that I really break down and sort of show in a categorical framework how all these different types of interference come together and play off of each other. And once you wrap your head around it, you start seeing them everywhere, and it just sort of becomes a little bit easier to understand how you might be pulled and pushed in ways that you didn't actually want to be.
Mm-hmm. So you talk about multitasking, Adam. Is it always bad? I know I find I tend to multitask when, say, I'm watching a not very demanding TV show. I really don't feel like I need 100% of my attention to keep up with what's going on. And it's not particularly life and death anyway if I miss something. So I'll read a magazine or check my email or play a game on my iPad. And it seems to work in that situation without any negative consequences. But am I training my brain to behave badly when I do that?
I would say that, I agree with you, and I describe it very much the same way. We don't know the long-term consequences of engaging in multitasking behavior, even when you're not doing things that are critical. It's possible that it, puts you into a type of cognitive style that makes you more distractible in general. And there's certainly correlational data, not causal data, that suggests that might be true. But putting that aside for now, I would say in general, multitasking is a choice that you make based on, an informed decision about how you interact with the world, either in an optimal and suboptimal way, and what your goals are. So if your goals are to produce something that's very high quality, that really represents you, that has a time, stamp on it that it needs to be accomplished by, then I would suggest that the data would indicate that the way you accomplish that is to do one thing at a time, and that high levels of multitasking will degrade your performance and possibly make you miss your deadline. But then other times when there are very low level activities, most people find multitasking more fun. Because of its higher novelty load, has a greater sort of drive of the reward system. And so it might be the only way you can get through a set of boring tasks is to multitask them. And I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. So I agree with you. I think it comes down to making the decision. But, that's the part that many people are challenged by, is this, act of taking control over how they use technology based on this information. So you might understand it and wrap your head around, that texting and driving or doing email when you're on a conference call is going to degrade the performance that you really want to bring to the table, but you do it anyway. And so that's where you really need to bring a set of rules and behaviors and strategies on board so that you can actually enact that plan of interacting with your technology in a healthier way.
Yeah, it makes a huge amount of sense. I know that perhaps you haven't had a morning like that, but your goal that you set for the morning is to write a certain amount or write about a particular topic and complete that task. And you get to the end of the morning and you've made a little progress because of everything else that was happening, whether they were, your own mind fired off and said, boy, I had to check this thing, or you had external interruptions and so on. But Adam, you talk about internal distractions. There are a lot of people who say meditation increases your focus and helps you screen out distracting thoughts. I know my fellow podcaster, Tim Ferriss, is a big advocate of meditation, and he uses the term monkey brain. He says that meditation helps quiet his monkey brain. Do you agree with the value of meditation, and is there any science on this?
Yeah, there's great science. And, Tim is a buddy of mine. We've talked about this a lot. There is a lot of, relatively recent evidence, considering it is an ancient practice of mindfulness, speaking very broadly about that whole category. There's lots of different types of meditation practices, but the data would suggest that it can have a benefit on our attention abilities themselves, but also mood and stress. A lot of those studies are difficult to interpret, either because they're done on experts, meditators, where there might be a lot of factors that could result in this type of finding aside from just the meditation itself. And then it's often difficult to do very well controlled, placebo-controlled studies when the intervention is something as complex as a meditation retreat, let's say. But I would say that there's certainly a strong signal out there from the convergence of a lot of findings that seem to show similar type of effects. I'm very intrigued by it. We actually have a video game, or more of an app, that we created that uses our closed loop system to challenge internal focus and the sort of regulation of internal distraction, called MetaTrain. And we're now, we just completed a study of 20-year-olds using that app on a 6-week training program. And now we're beginning a study of older adults. And because of a video game format of delivery of the meditative type of practices, we can do a very nicely placebo-controlled design. So we're waiting to still finish analyzing that data, but we're already getting some encouraging results. So I do think that the practice is, as we advance in terms of our empirical evidence related to it, it's going to really show that it is essentially an attention exercise, and it can be used to build these skills that can help the distracted mind.
Excellent. Well, that's something to look forward to. Look really excited to see when those results, when they come out. Somebody who I think you would probably agree with, Adam, is Martin Lindstrom, the branding expert. His last book was Small Data, and its thesis was that brands could achieve great insights for new products and new strategies by focusing on what seemed to be really insignificant details in the environment or in their customers' homes. And he says that we really need to be keen observers and always be engaged with the environment. And the reason I think you'd agree with him is because he basically observes people and find that if they have even, 20 seconds of downtime, they don't engage with the environment. They pull out their smartphone, to check Facebook or Instagram or something. And he ended up, or so he claims at least, getting rid of his smartphone just so that he wouldn't have that distraction. And I suppose that would probably be a good thing for all of us, but the odds of it happening are slim to none.
Yeah, I would respond to that in two ways. First of all, it's not just, I would say, being a keen observer of our environment, although I appreciate that comment. I think it's certainly true. But I think that that's not the only thing that we suffer when every time there's a moment of freedom, we resort to our devices. I also think that we need to be more keen observers of our minds, of our internal environment. And the act of just having that quiet moment, data would suggest, is also an area where creativity lives. And so we don't only rob ourselves the potential to see things around us that are important and can change our perspective, but also just to think and to explore our inner worlds. And so that phenomena of always needing to be in our information technology sources does present, a great challenge to us in lots of ways. That's a ton of what we talk about in the book. And, the forces that drive us to that are complex. And we also break that down in the distracted mind. I think that most people, if they think about and do a little introspection, would find that some of it is just driven by a complete intolerance to boredom. The act of just not being stimulated every moment, I think, is a real powerful driving force. It doesn't allow us to just wait on that line at the grocery store and just be, quiet. And then there is also the source of influence from anxiety, that fear of missing out. What is going on that I'm not aware of? Who's doing what? And I think social media also plays a role in exacerbating that. So these are very powerful primal forces that really could drive our behavior without our awareness, but prevent us from these moments that I agree are evaporating.
Yeah, probably some social forces too, because I think there's a feeling that if you're simply standing there, that's awkward, that if people see you, they'll think that you're a loser. And I'm sure that you've been to networking events and sort of things that they have at conferences where a third of the people, rather than talking to other people, are sort of hunched over their smartphones. And yeah, I'm sure that a few of them really are transacting important business, but probably the vast majority don't just want to stand there looking awkward. This way they can appear to be socially connected with somebody at least.
Yeah, I think that is probably also related to anxiety, maybe not the fear of missing out, but another aspect of social anxiety. Mm-hmm. And I would say that problem's not likely to go away, especially as young people are maybe even losing or impairing their skills of face-to-face communication, which makes that, even a more likely scenario that people will be more comfortable texting across the room rather than walking up and having a conversation with someone face-to-face. So, yeah, these are incredibly complex issues that we face, and, they're multi-layered, and that's what, I'm really interested in trying to dissect it so that we can remedy it.
So in another part of the book, Adam, you talk about Alvin Toffler's waves, and right now we're in the fourth wave, the information age, and even more specifically, we're in sort of a fifth subwave, which is the smartphone wave. But you think that we might be on the cusp of a whole new wave rather than just like another mini wave. Why is that? What do you think is going to happen?
Well, I think that we are now connecting with our biology in a way that we haven't before. So, we think of our current wave as really, in many ways, an IT way. It's about information, right? We're in the information age. And, each of these advances from computers to the internet to the mobile phone to social media have really been layering on ways that we get to communicate, which is just another form of exchanging information. And it's not only communication that's used, it's also other forms of information. But now we're entering an age of biology and modifying biology, whether it be at the genetic level or implantables, electrical types of stimulation that I think will change us and merge in a very complex way with all of our information technologies that continue to evolve. Things like virtual reality and augmented reality, I would say, are yet another wavelet in that information age. But as we bring our biology in and learn more from the basic sciences on how we could change ourselves, I would say that would essentially be yet another wave.
So folks like Ray Kurzweil have suggested that we'll, at some point, have digital interfaces for our brains, maybe be able to download information or somehow add additional processing power. It seems like complete science fiction now, but you're pretty close to this. What do you think of the prospects for that kind of thing?
It's going to be a challenge. Our brains are still, in many ways, almost infinitely complex. To those of us that study it, it's humbling every single day. And, to have interfaces that really offload memory like that, I don't think is going to happen in the immediate future. I really don't. But not to say that it won't happen, because we've seen how much has been accomplished already with our devices. So I think it will eventually be part of our future. I'm more interested less on like the far far distant predictions, but more on what can be done now in a non-invasive way to use technology to improve the human condition itself. And that's much more interesting to me. How do we take all of these tools that are emerging in the consumer space, like virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, wearable, physiological devices, motion capture, to not offload things that humans do, but just make us better, to improve our function, to improve our happiness, to improve our mindfulness. I think there's so much potential there that has not yet been realized to take technology and leverage it for that goal. And that's going to, I think, have a bigger impact in the shorter term on us.
Is there any chance that technology has the power to save us? And what I mean by that is we're seeing really rapid advances in artificial intelligence. And, if we could get Alexa or Siri or the assistant of your choice to turn into a really good filter and sort of showing us what we need, screening out the distractions, keeping us on task, do you think that's potential, or is that a pipe dream too?
No, I think it's potential. I think that we'd get to that sooner than we do to implantable memory devices. But, it's been a thorny problem. Most executives that I know still are the first pass of filtering through their emails, myself included. And it's and it's not getting any easier. I have Alexa, Echo at home and Siri, and I love all the new technologies of AI and especially voice interface, but they're not very smart now, as we all know. It would be great to have that type of technical assistance. It's not my area of expertise, so I don't know how soon out we're going to start seeing tools that are really usable that help us manage in a game-changing way, but I sure hope it happens.
Yeah, me too. A couple of days ago, I spoke to Tim Harford. He's an economist whose latest book is Messy. And the core message of that book is, I wouldn't say diametrically opposed to yours. And I think that you and Tim would probably agree on most things. But he makes the point that neat and tidy, either physically or digitally, isn't always good, that distractions can sometimes be productive. And I think you'd probably allow for that. But he also talks about multitasking, and he is a big proponent of sequential multitasking. When you're stuck on one task, you switch to another task and sort of let background, if you will, to use the computer term, work on the first problem. I'm curious as to what your take on that strategy is, because I'm obviously very rapid multitasking. You make the point in your book is a bad thing and that you can't really focus if you're switching constantly. But he's advocating more, sort of a slower process of multitasking sequentially, where you switch from one task to another and focus on that for a while. But is there any science behind the fact that our brains can actually work on problems, invent things, and so on unconsciously or in background while we're thinking about other stuff?
Well, there's a lot in that. Let me try to unpack it a little bit. I always put distraction and multitasking in two separate categories of interference. Distractions is, what we try to ignore and it might get through anyway. And multitasking is when we make the decision to engage in more than one thing. So in terms of distractions, they often degrade performance. They create interference with our goals, and it's well described. But it doesn't mean that good things can't happen from them. And, I've had these debates with others, and I think that it's completely appropriate that if your filter is too good and on all the time, you might miss opportunities to be inspired by things that were not within your goals, that are unexpected. So like everything in life of yin yang, this is one of them, right? You don't want to walk through life just with goal directed blinders on and not being able to see in the periphery at all. So yes, I agree that other unexpected influences could have a benefit. And, to carry that discussion over to multitasking, again, it goes back to that idea that multitasking is not always a bad thing. And if you are stuck on something, I think that, there is evidence out there, although I'd have to look through my literature to come up with the paper reference, that, there is some degree of subliminal type of problem solving that can occur. Sometimes the tip of the tongue syndrome has been described from this perspective of just, it's best to just wait for it to appear without effort. But I would say that if you are constantly jumping between tasks, even if it was methodical and slow, you may be robbing yourself of the type of performance that can only be achieved with sustained attention on one area. And so I would push back and say, yes, that is probably seems to be an appropriate strategy sometimes. But sometimes I would say that being in one zone, and if you are stuck, it might be better to just take a break, do a little light exercise, take a walk, expose yourself to nature, do something in the mindfulness practice domain, and then come back to it, as opposed to interrupting with another completely different information stream. I would argue, and I don't know. I mean, this is really where I push my boundaries of what I know from the literature in terms of like a head-to-head comparison between those approaches. So maybe it's my own intuition there, and I don't want to oversell it, but I think it's an interesting discussion about when it makes sense to not switch, but just to take a good old-fashioned break, a non-tech information break, and then return.
Great. Well, let me ask you one last question here. And one of your projects that our listeners may not have heard of is one that you worked on involving rhythm and the brain. What's that all about?
Yeah, we have 8 new games at Neuroscape that we've been working on for the last several years that focus across a whole bunch of different domains that we want to optimize. So I already mentioned NeuroRacer, which became EVA, which is our one big publication in that domain. But we have the meditation game called MetaTrain. We have a physical fitness meets cognitive fitness game called Body Brain Trainer. And then we have a game called Rhythmicity. Rhythmicity is a game that we developed really inspired by my friendship with Mickey Hart, who's the drummer from the Grateful Dead, as well as another musician, Rob Garza, from the band Thievery Corporation, who's contributed music and rhythms to the game that we created, Rhythmicity. The hypothesis here is that the act of becoming more rhythmic will have benefits on your brain in the more general domains of cognitive control that we've been talking about, like attention and working memory and task switching. And the reason why is because our brains rely upon high precision in terms of timing and this act of anticipating an event that has not yet occurred. And these are 2 critical features of what rhythm is all about. And so we think that a lot of the more anecdotal or less longitudinal studies in the music therapy domain may be showing some signs of improvement in cognition because of these very features of rhythm. So we've created a game that adaptively in our closed loop system, as all our games are, pushes you to more and more challenging rhythmic interactions, both like in the rudiments and the complexity of the rhythms themselves, the tempo, whether it's audio, visual, or both sensory modalities integrated, how much time you have to anticipate. And as you get better and more rhythmic, the game is constantly pushing you. And then, as we do with all of our games, we take it into a study that we're just launching now to see what does the act of becoming more rhythmic on a game mean in terms of how your brain functions. So we'll look at MRI and EEG to look at actual neural structure and neural function. We'll look at cognitive performance in various other domains that were not part of the rhythm training game to see how the act of becoming more rhythmic transfers to other cognitive skills.
Great. Well, I am definitely rhythm challenged, so that sounds like one for me when it's released.
Yeah, I don't know if it makes you a better dancer. That's still an open-ended question. But
it would take a really powerful program for that to happen, but we can hope. So let me remind everyone that we're speaking with Adam Gazzaley, neuroscientist and co-author of the new book, The Distracted Mind, Ancient Brains in a High-Tech World. Adam, what's your preferred way for people to find you online?
Sure. So I'm on social media. I'm on Facebook under my name. I'm on Twitter under Adam Gaz, ADAMGAZZ. And we have a new website launch just now for our new center at UCSF called neuroscape.ucsf.edu. And that will be a way that you can keep informed on our latest research, our latest technologies. We have a mailing list, and we post talks and papers and everything on that website.
Great. Well, we'll link there. We'll link to Adam's new book and to any other resources we mentioned in the course of our conversation on the show notes page at rogerdooley.com podcast. And we'll have a text version of our conversation there in PDF format, too. It's a great way to refer back to something interesting you heard, and a lot easier than trying to fast forward through the audio. Adam, thanks so much for being on the show. Your book really raises an important issue and offers at least a ray of hope for us humans.
Great. Well, it's been fun talking with you.
Thank you for joining me for this episode of the Brainfluence Podcast. To continue the discussion and to find your own path to brainy success, please visit us at rogerdooley.com.